and I'm in good company on your channel with this because you've had a lot of Chuck Mead, who we love to death, and a lot of Chris Scruggs, who we love to death. You've Dave Rowe, rest in peace, our brother Dave Rowe. You've had a lot of kind of, pretty hardcore lower Broadway. We've done some time down there,
Tim Carroll.
Oh my God, yeah, totally. Those years that I came to Nashville with Gove, I went back down to the Gulf Coast, and there was a gap there before I had the balls to move to Nashville, and so I had to kind of burn out on the Gulf Coast, where we played a lot of music and a lot of original music, and a lot of people don't know that. I never grew up playing any cover songs. It was singer-songwriters, bluegrass, and then and a lot of original music with Gove and a guy named Nick Branch. We had a band called the Filthy Rich and played high energy blues, swing, kind of jazzy stuff, and some rootsy music. And I played the Telecaster on all this stuff. So kind of was somehow getting into this world that ended up being the right thing to do, following the music that you love, right, as a young guitar player. But so in that time period, I was going to a local music store in Pensacola, Florida called Blues Angel Music. Pensacola is the cradle of naval aviation. The Blue Angels are based down there. So this guy's music store, he was an ex Top Gun fighter pilot, and he loved the guitar. So we opened up this store, and it was our greatest kind of real deal music store down there that had vintage gear and stuff. So we'd go in there all the time. And those guys had been coming up to Nashville to go to the NAMM show. And so they came to the NAMM show, and they went to Roberts, as you do, and they saw Don Kelley with Johnny Highland, and they bought the CD that Don, basically crammed down your throat every 5 minutes on that gig. There's a gazillion stories about that whole gig down there. But I walked into the music store one day to get some strings or something, and I heard them playing that live record on the stereo. And I heard this just awesome country bends and all this amazing. I went, who is that? That sounds awesome. And they went, well, if you go to Nashville, you got to go to the Roberts and hear this band called the Don Kelley Band, and that's a guy named Johnny Highland. And I went, well, holy shit. And so fast forward to when I actually moved here, I was about 21 years old, and I moved here and got a little apartment on Music Row, a little tiny one-room apartment for $500 a month. And all I knew to do, even though I had some of these connections that I met with Gove, Carl Jackson and a bunch of these other guys that has also come full circle, because we just did the Chet Atkins tribute record together. That whole thing is crazy how this has all come so full circle. But that's why all these stories are so long, because there's a lot of history to go back, and to tell the story correctly, you got to go back 30 years. Even though those guys, they can't start putting you to work right away. You still have to earn your badges here, And so all I knew to do was go down to Roberts and check out this band called the Don Kelley Band, which I think me and my dad swung into off the interstate one time and went and heard a set or two of them on the way to somewhere else. But so I'd get in the car and I'd go down there every weekend, and you could park right in front of Roberts back then. And so I'd get a parking spot, and I'd hang out in the front door and drink Shinerbach beer and listen to Johnny. I was standing right there next to Johnny. I could set my beer on Johnny's Fender twin amp. I didn't do that, but that's how close I was. And it was loud, and you could hear every note. And I'd go down there, and I met all those guys, and they knew who I was. And I did this for a couple months, And it could have been 3 months. It could have been 6. I can't remember. But I'd go down there, and I told Don, I said, hey, man, look, I said, I just moved here from the Gulf Coast. I was in a band down there playing this kind of music. I said, if you ever need a sub for Johnny, let me know. I just moved here, And Don goes, oh, man, we appreciate it, but we don't ever let anybody sit in. We don't have sit-ins, He was like, Don was like, it's like talking to, the Godfather, And so, but they knew me because I was coming down there every night for like months and hanging out at Roberts and drinking beer and watching the Don Kelley Band. So I kind of knew these guys at that point, And so one night I was out on the sidewalk talking to Don, and this guy, Joe's son, walked up, who was an old songwriter, and he had a couple hits, one of them that you guys all know, and I can't remember what it was. But I knew him from the Florida Band, from the Songwriters Festival. And he stopped and he goes, He goes, hey, man, you guys know each other? And Don goes, well, not really, but he comes down here every night and stands in the doorway and drinks beer and listens to the band. And Joe goes, man, you ought to get this guy up to sit in one night. He goes, he can, whatever he said. I hate saying that kind of shit, but he goes, man, this guy can play. You got to get him up. And so Don goes, really? He goes, all right, man, come on down here and play. And Kenny Vaughn was playing on a Sunday night, and it was snowing and ice fucking everywhere. And I didn't know how to drive in this shit. I'm from Alabama Gulf Coast. The only thing white I saw down there that looked like snow was the sand at the beach. And so I pull up. I parked right up front. There's nobody in there. It's like a Sunday night. Kenny's up there playing, and I brought a hollow body guitar. I didn't even bring a Telecaster. I was not even thinking. I just thought, hey, I've seen these guys play some blues too. Don loves the blues and other stuff. I'm going to take my Guild hollow body down there. And Don loved that. He goes, man, who would do this? He goes, this band's known for the Telecaster, and here you show up with this hollow body and want to play the blues songs. And I said, yeah, man, I love the blues too. And so, and he goes, and then I came back down and sat in with him again, and I brought a telly. And Don goes, hey, man, Johnny's on his way out. He goes, if you want this gig, you can have it.
Wow.
Which is funny because everybody since then has always said the same thing. Patty and Jerry Douglas, they said, hey, this gig's yours if you want it. They never said you're hired or anything like that. They're like, hey, this gig's yours if you want it. And I was like, oh, well, of course I want it. So then I started playing with Don. And that turned into, it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. I always say 4 nights a week, 4 hours a night for 4 years. I did that gig. But about a year in, I started getting work with Patty. She hired me to be her guitar player on the road, and we ended up doing some sessions with her, with Anne-Marie and Owen Hale on drums, and Russ Paul and Albert Lee. I got to record with Albert Lee. It was one of my first big major sessions in Nashville. And here I am sitting in a room with Albert Lee, and I'm just like, I don't even know how to use my gear. I just moved here a year ago. And so that turned it. But the cool thing about Don was I'd go tour with those bands, and when I came back, he always let me have that gig. So he would get a sub, and I always came back and had, so I had like the best of both worlds. I had that nice in-town gig, which immediately, and I'm not just speaking for myself, but all the guys that have come through Don's band, you're, especially back then, I mean, that was a good time to be in that band.
It's a huge seal of approval to be in Don Kelley's band.
It is. And so you can't deny it. It really is. And so that, I was immediately considered, and I don't think it would be the same today. But back then, you only had that one block. And so it was, everybody knew each other, man. You had the Fiddle and Steel, you had Layla's, Roberts, Wolfie's, Full Moon Saloon. There was like a couple clubs that had the stage. There was a little scene on that one block, but there were no rooftops. There were no multi-level bars. There was none of this shit now where it's all the way down to the river. I mean, it has really changed. It's night and day. I used to be disappointed if I couldn't park my car in front of the front door of Roberts. Dude, you can't even get a car downtown now. And so it was a totally different thing. So I don't know if that gunslinger seal of approval would mean as much right now as it did back then, because you were known on that street. I mean, it was like the Wild West. You were like Doc Holliday walking down the street. Everybody knew who you were. You're like, man, that's the new guy. Well, let's go check him out. I remember all the guys, they would all come in and, do the, and one time Brent Mason and Paul Franklin both came in together and sat right in front of me. And I just looked at Don. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, these guys are going to sit right here? And they did, and now we're all friends, and we've all worked together and all that stuff. And it all just works out, and it's all great. And then Dave Rose started playing with us down there, and man, that was a pretty ferocious band. That was Dave just wearing it out on upright bass, and Don and Artie and me. And, it was a great way to learn how to play real country music. Don still loved playing some shuffles and some old Delbert tunes and some Bruce Chanel songs and just like all this, he'd do some Western swing. So there was a lot of different there was a lot of different feels, some great country shuffles, some nice ballads. I mean, the Weight, there was it wasn't just a country band. It was a band and now we played those songs thousands of times, but it was a good variety of songs. I mean, in the platform, and there was no other instrument to share any fills with. Don would play some electric guitar stuff every once in a while, but dude, the weight of the fills and the soloing was all guitar. And so I think that's why, obviously that's why that band is known for the guitar players, because it was all guitar. There was you're not trading with the fiddle and the steel and the piano or anything. It was all you all the time. So man, your chops, you're young when you play in that band. Your chops are on fire because you're playing 4 hours a night with no break. I mean, I wouldn't leave the stage. We'd play up there for 4 hours a night. But I do remember towards the end of it, you've got there's a shelf life for a gig no matter how great it is. And you're going to start kind of getting burned out creatively on it. Because if you're an artist, and I throw that term gets thrown around very loosely in this town, we all know that. But if you have something to say and there's more that you're wanting to fulfill in your life as an artist, and I say artist because it's not just music, it's any creative field. If you're working for somebody else, and now these days everybody sees a guitar case on the airplane, they go, "Hey, guitar player, who do you work for?" And I go, "I don't work for anybody, but I work with a lot of people." Or, and I'm joking, but it's kind of our way of flexing a little bit and going, "Hey man, we don't really work, we don't play for anybody, but we play with a lot of people." But it's that whole thing about, if you're not famous, they just want to hear a bunch of big names, like, "Oh, who do you play for?" It's like, well, you want to hear me say Keith Urban? Because I mean, that's not. No, I mean, we all do. Everybody does their own stuff, but that's all the insecurities that we'll all have forever. I mean, as people that do this, there's all the insecurities shit there. But that was the gig that really kind of like, and I'm the dude that's like, okay, man, look, I don't know what I'm doing. I've always just followed good music, good people, and if the money and the work is there, then that's even better. But those boxes have to be checked. It's either got to be good music, good people, or good pay, right? I mean, and the pay these days doesn't factor into it as much, because we have been working at this for so long. We're all in a pretty comfortable place now, today. Tomorrow, who knows? But we've worked at getting there, because the music does matter that much. I think back then there might have been a little bit of base pay for Don, because he was kind of like I said, we call him the godfather of Lower Broadway back then. And so I think his deal with those guys down there was probably a little bit different, but there might have been some base pay of $20 or $30, and that's what we knew. I don't know what it really was, but I think that it was probably somewhere around $20 or $30 per person base pay from the bar that you were guaranteed, and then the rest was hustling that tip jug, man. And Don knew how to do it, and it would end up being probably anywhere from, I'd say, at least 150. I know my memory is very foggy with this, but I'd say it was 150 to 180 or 90, maybe 200 a piece on a really good night.
Getting paid to go to
it started to
college.
get better as Nashville got busier and busier and busier, and it did, But yeah, it was, I don't know if you do the average, was that $800 a weekend. So I'm 21 or 22 years old, and my rent's $500 a month, and my car's paid for back then at that point. I mean, that was pretty good. I could survive, Yeah, and on the Gulf Coast, I never, as my music increased, the bills increased. So what are the first bills you get when you're a kid? You got your car insurance, or maybe your car payment or something, or the first things you start paying for as a teenager. So I was playing at the Floribama. Hell, we were making, $150, $200 a night, playing, 7 7 nights a week and twice on Sunday. So I always had a wad of cash in my sock drawer, you know. And so I thought, well, this is working out pretty good. I hated school. I quit school 2 weeks into the 10th grade. Me and my best friend walked out the front door and never went back. The school I did go to, I was sleeping half the time. And so going to college or doing anything like that was just nowhere near to being in the cards. So I never had a real job. I never had a day job or any kind of job other than I can proudly say, and it's amazing to say this now at 45 years old, sitting here in East Nashville with you and Maddie at the Cabin Studio. It's like, you know, I can proudly say that every dime I've ever made has been generated under the umbrella of music, you know, which I cannot believe I'm saying that. And it's also the lack of knowledge also is, you know, I couldn't do anything else, but we know why, because as all of us, I mean, the music is so important that you're kind of a lifer at that point, even before you know it. There's nothing else that you're here to do. There's little interests, of course, as we get older, and we've been doing music for so long. Of course, we have interest in other things, but nothing carries the weight that does, you know. And that's why you got to be a little crazy. I mean, who's crazy enough to get up and do this every single day since you first get the bug doing it? No matter what, you're going to do this. And you're going to wake up and figure out that it has worked, or you're going to wake up and figure out that, well, you know what, maybe this isn't working out so well. But either way, you're going to figure it out. But I call those lifers, man. We're just, you know, those people are. They're not going to stop doing this tomorrow and go get their real estate license. That's not going to happen. Yeah. You know. Yeah. And I make it sound like it's a club, and maybe it is a little bit, but those are the guys they're like to me, like kind of they're like the larger than life characters. I mean, the guys like Kenny Vaughan and all these guys have been in Nashville as long as I can remember. You know, the first guys that I started seeing here, Jack Pearson, Pat Burgess, and Kenny Vaughan, Kenny Greenberg, Uncle Larry Bukovac, now that we did this record with. It's another mind blower for me. Talk about feeling like you just graduated college. You know, every one of those little things. I mean, the Jerry Douglas thing was, I didn't listen to a lot of commercial music in my household growing up because my family they were huge Newgrass Revival fans. And so, you know, there was no hard rock or any pop music or like John Oates. I didn't even know who John Oates was. I met him in Telluride. I didn't know who Hall & Oates was. I heard Manny on the radio a couple of times somewhere, and that was about it. And I didn't know who Patty Loveless was, really. I mean, we didn't listen to any radio or any of that. You know, we listened to, it was, you know, Sesame Street on PBS, and it was Garrison Keillor, you know, and Prairie Home Companion, which that's a whole other story. But Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush and Mark O'Connor and Bela Fleck and all those guys, John Cowan and all the new Acoustic, David Grisman, and that whole world, Tony Rice and all that, you know, that's kind of where the bar started. And if you're listening to music like that when you're a little kid, you already have the ear and the feel for music way before you even start picking up an instrument, because you've heard music that's really high level. And I'm not saying there's no prodigy or no genius or no perfect pitch or none of that kind of shit, but that's my thing. It's like, I don't know if you're really born with the talent as much as you're a product of your environment. I'm a firm believer that you're a product of your environment. So that's my only thing is like, it's the fact that my parents, who don't play, my uncle's a self-taught musician I hung out with all the time. But if you're providing something that's a really high art form and you're hearing what being in tune sounds like and what a great song is, you know, and like then you come to a place like this and it's like, well, shit, then it just gets, you know, magnified and expanded at the same time, you know. So you're just thrown into this huge creative town that's not like any other. But
there's two things.
I'm rambling on about all this shit.
No,
but
you said something about let's say kids that are read to by their parents do better in life. Mm-hmm. And then I've already did kids who listen to jazz at an early age do better in life. I bet you kids who listen to really high level bluegrass players or whatever probably do better in life.
Yeah.
And supposedly it somehow rearranges their brain a little bit.
Yeah.
And if they become musicians, maybe it raises the bar of what's possible at an early age.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just, I mean, not to get too nerdy musically, but just as your ear, as you keep working at these things and you're striving to get better in whatever way, then your ear starts accepting these notes that might be a little bit different than just your normal 3-chord progression. Hey, you only need 1 chord. It's not about simple music being amazing, because it is. But as an instrumentalist, if you want to start stretching out and covering more territory and developing more vocabulary, then yeah, your ear starts expanding, and you might go through your Stevie Ray Vaughan phase, and then you might come back to it 20 or 30 years later and gain a whole new appreciation of what that is. But you're going through these different journeys of okay, well, that music when I was 13, I didn't understand those notes, but now this is some of my favorite shit. And so you're going through all this. It's a living, breathing thing, and so it's moving and changing all the time, you know.